All right, let's dive into one of the most debated passages in all of prophecy, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The big question is, does this chapter completely dismantle the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture? The belief that the church is gathered to Christ before the tribulation even starts? Well, that's what we're tackling. You hear this argument all the time. People will say, look, Paul lays out a series of events that seem to put the church smack in the middle of the tribulation, coming face to face with the man of lawlessness. But this entire massive debate really hinges on how you understand just a handful of words. And the single most important question you have to ask is this. When Paul says that day, which day is he actually talking about? The answer to that is the key that unlocks this whole passage. So, before we even touch the text, we have to get the context right. This wasn't some calm academic lecture Paul was giving. He was writing to a church that was in a full-blown panic. So here's the scene. Somebody told the Thessalonians that the day of the Lord was already underway. And they were terrified, not because it was happening, but because they thought they'd miss the gathering, their rescue. So Paul's goal here isn't to hand them a complex new prophetic chart. It's pastoral care. He's trying to comfort them. Okay, so with that panicked context locked in our minds, let's unpack Paul's logic and figure out what he really means by that day. And here it is, the verse at the absolute center of it all. Paul says two things have to happen before that day can get here: a great rebellion or apostasy, and the man of lawlessness being revealed. So, what's that day? Well, the most natural reading, especially given their panic, is that he's talking about the day of the Lord, that future period of God's judgment they were so afraid had already started. He's not talking about the rapture event itself. Paul's logic here is actually super simple. He's basically saying, hey, you're scared the day of the Lord has begun? Okay, let's check the evidence. Have you seen this great rebellion? Have you seen the man of lawlessness step onto the world stage? No? Well then, relax. It hasn't started. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. We have to focus not just on what Paul says, but on what he doesn't say. Because this is where a lot of interpretations, I think, start adding to the text. Just look at this. Paul says the day of the Lord has some very clear defining events, but notice he never says, and you, the church, will be here to personally experience them. He says these are markers of that day, but he never says the gathering, our gathering, can't happen until after these markers appear. He's describing the date, not their personal schedule. Let me give you a really simple analogy. Imagine it's the middle of July, and someone bursts into your house shouting, "Winter is here! Winter has started!" You're not going to run to the calendar to check. You're just going to look out the window. You'd see there's no snow, you'd feel it's not freezing cold, and you would instantly know that the claim is false. That is exactly what Paul is doing here. He's just giving the Thessalonians some obvious, observable evidence to shut down a false alarm right then and there. So you might be asking, how does this fit with a pre-trib timeline without creating a big mess? Let's take a look at how it all fits together, nice and neat. In this view, Christ gathers his church first. That's the rapture. Then, the period we call the day of the Lord begins, and it's within that period, after it started, that the apostasy and the man of lawlessness are revealed. So you see, Paul's signs aren't pre-rapture signs. They're signs that the day of the Lord itself is underway. And think about this for a second. The very fact that they were panicking tells you everything. It proves they didn't expect to be there for the day of the Lord in the first place. Their fear was based on the idea that they were supposed to be rescued from it, and they were terrified they had somehow missed the boat. And that really brings us to the whole point of this letter. This was never about creating complex prophecy charts. It was about pastoral care. So to read this passage as some kind of proof against the pre-trib view, you really have to make a couple of big assumptions that just aren't in the text. First, you have to assume that day means the rapture. And second, you have to assume that just because Paul mentions these signs, it means the church must be there to witness them. So you see, the main point here isn't about correcting some future timeline for us. No, it's about Paul, the pastor, correcting a very real, very intense, present-day panic for people that he loved. I mean, his whole message could be boiled down to these two simple, powerful sentences. That's the heart of what he's trying to get across to them. And that really is the final takeaway. When you read 2 Thessalonians 2 in its original context, you realize it's not a warning about all the terrible things the church must endure.
It's a message of profound comfort for a terrified group of believers. Now, for the full background on this, definitely go check out part 1 of this explainer if you haven't. And hey, if you see this passage differently, I genuinely love to hear it. Drop a thoughtful comment below and walk us through the text. Let's keep the discussion grounded right where it belongs.